John Huston began his film career as an actor, established his reputation as a screenwriter, and made his mark as a director. He has cut a wide swathe through Hollywood for more than 50 years. He's been called King Rebel, as well as the quintessential Hollywood Maverick. He is a commanding presence both on the screen and behind the camera, with a string of acknowledged classics to his credit, including The Maltese Falcon, which was his first directing job, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, The African Queen, and The Man Who Would Be King. Huston's greatest popular and critical successes have been lean, sardonic tales of men pushed to their limits, but his flamboyance and adventurousness have led him to tackle big subjects and weighty literature too. He brought Moby Dick and the Bible to the screen, as well as the life of Sigmund Freud. He seems also to have a special affinity with the mavericks of contemporary literature, like Tennessee Williams, Flannery O'Connor, whose works The Night of the Iguana and Wise Blood he has filmed successfully. Shortly after this dialogue took place, he embarked on a new project, one of the century's great unfilmable novels. Malcolm Lowry's Under the Volcano. Huston has been nominated 13 times for Academy Awards at the time of writing, winning 2 for writing and directing The Treasure of the Sierra Madre in 1948. He has also received AFI's 1983 Life Achievement Award. In the dialogue that follows, he discusses his controversial experiments with color, his collaborations with Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote, and his relationship with actors. John, why did you become a director? You had already established yourself as a screenwriter when you directed your first film, The Maltese Falcon. Was being a writer just a stepping stone to directing?
I discovered during my period as a screenwriter the desire to become a director. It wasn't to protect my writing, in a way I am told other writers have proceeded. It was simply the desire. Directing is just an extension of the writing. They're not different departments, really. I can give you an example. There was a scene in The Night of the Iguana that Tennessee Williams and I were having difficulty with. We had written it quite well. We had written it 2 or 3 times, but it just didn't pan out. It was a scene where a young girl comes to Richard Burton's room to importune him again. She's trying to seduce him. He's had an unfortunate background so far as the seduction of ladies is concerned, and he's trying to avoid this. He's doing his level best to avoid it. But she comes into the room, and then this dialogue scene ensues, wherein he tries to explain to her why he doesn't choose to make love to her. The dialogue was good, but the scene wasn't satisfactory. So I said to Tennessee Williams, could you do something? Look at it, see if you have any ideas, Tennessee. He came back the next morning with a scene. It opens with Burton standing before a chiffonier with a bottle of whiskey on it. The girl opens the door and startles him. He's shaving. He cuts himself, and the bottle of whiskey falls off the chiffonier. The dialogue then continues as he barefoot walks on broken glass, and presently the girl, in the spirit of martyrdom, joins him, and she too walks barefoot on broken glass. The scene proceeds in that vein, as these lines pass back and forth between them that are walking on broken glass. That is one of the best scenes in the picture, an example of real dramatic genius in the writing of a scene.
We'll stay here together, live here, be beachcombers, like Fletcher Christian, that native girl, living in the sun. You're going to marry me, Larry.
Oh, Lord, no. Nothing could be worse for a girl in your unstable condition to be mixed up with a man in my unstable condition. Because 2 people in unstable conditions are like 2 countries facing each other in unstable conditions. The destructive potential could blow the whole world to bits, past all repair.
You're walking barefoot on more glass.
I would walk on brimstone through hell to get you out of my room. Now, will you get out of my room?
I don't believe you don't love me.
I love nobody. I know it's practically impossible for anybody to realize that they are not loved when they're in love with somebody that they think they're in love with. But nevertheless...
You couldn't walk barefoot on glass if you didn't love me.
I am walking barefoot on glass because you won't leave me alone.
All right, I'll do it too. I'll walk on glass, and I'll bleed to death with you.
Oh, no, you will do this. You will get out of my room and out of my life. You will not come near me again. You understand?
Put me down. I hate you. You've ruined my life. You killed me. Kill me. Cut me down.
Eso digo yo. Dicen que el que es casado a veces está muerto. De alguien te lo dijo que eso no es cierto. Ay, 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 yo digo esto que yo soy casado, pero no apesto. Dicen que no se siente la despedida. Dile al que te lo digo, cielito lindo, que se despida. Ay, 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 ay. Del cercador ahí. Ver si se siente, si hasta se llora.
Since man has known woman, there has never been such a night. The night of the iguana.
You made many pictures in black and white, each with a strong visual style. The Maltese Falcon, the treasure of Sierra Madre, and the red badge of courage come to mind, as well as the Night of the Iguana. In Moulin Rouge, Moby Dick, and later on Reflections in a Golden Eye, you tried to do something different from the conventional use of color in film. Why?
Up until Moulin Rouge, with the exception of the first 3-strip Technicolor feature Becky Sharp, which was muted and very beautiful, there was no attempt to even choose a palette in American films. The Japanese had done some fascinating experiments. When Moulin Rouge came along, I thought it wouldn't be right to just shoot it in straight color when color could give another dimension to the picture. So we conceived a different approach. There was a wedding between color and black and white, reinforcing the color, as it were, giving it strength, whereas color was apt to go limp, sentimental. We thought the black and white would give it the strength that the subject matter deserved. And this was an innovation. Moby Dick was the second picture I shot with the idea of using color as a medium of thought to convey an idea. The idea in Moulin Rouge was to flatten the color to give it a local, almost poster-like look, reminiscent of the lithographs and posters of Toulouse-Lautrec. Moulin Rouge was bitterly fought by Technicolor. They didn't want to fool around. They especially didn't want us to do this effect within the camera. I showed them tests we had shot of what I wanted, and they said, "You can let us tape those up in the lab as an example." We said, "All right," but the samples they sent back were very poor matches indeed. We proceeded to shoot the picture, but before we even started, Technicolor wrote letters to all the people involved, the principals, Warner Brothers, and so on, disclaiming any responsibility and advising against our proceeding this way. But our people backed us up, and the color was certainly the biggest triumph of the picture.
The story of shameless, seductive Paris. All her loves, ladies, her lusty legends. And Toulouse-Lautrec, the man who loved her and gave her immortality. Everything about this picture is marked with greatness. The director is Academy Award winner John Huston, acclaimed for his African Queen. The star is Jose Ferrer, another Academy Award winner, playing Toulouse-Lautrec, fabulous artist, famous lover.
That's why you're acting like this. You're in love with me, and you're jealous.
This is the headstrong, wayward Marie Charlet,
Please, monsieur, stay I'm with you.
the girl he met on the Paris streets, who endured his grotesque ugliness to become his first love, and Miriam, the only woman who truly loved him, and the only time he dare not reveal his adoration for fear of her rebuff.
Henri, tell me about Marie Charlet.
What do you want to know?
Were you in love with her?
Let us say that she opened doors for me that might better have remained closed.
In an exciting supporting role is gorgeous Zsa Zsa Gabor as the glamorous Jeanne Avril of the Moulin Rouge.
Listen again to your 17th year in the sun and the rain beside the river Seine.
You'll meet them all in this startling, daring love story of the days when Paris was a gay young girl and the whole world was her love. The fantastic La Goulou, her mortal enemy, the tantalizing Aisha, the wonderful Chocolat, the flamboyant Valentin de Saussay.
Get out! Get out!
Even as late as Reflections in a Golden Eye, I had to fight for color experimentation. I wanted to give a kind of amber golden look to the whole picture. I still think that black and white has a role in motion pictures, and not everything should be in color. In fact, unless the color is perfect to the idea, it can come between the beholder and the idea of the picture. One's eye can be deflected by the color, and one's thoughts as well. For instance, I cannot possibly see doing Freud in color or other pictures of a deeply psychological nature, unless the palette and the values coincide or are part of the idea. Why it's better for it not to be in color. In the case of Reflections of a Golden Eye, after valiant effort on the part of the producer, Ray Stark and myself, they agreed to let us open the picture in key cities in that special color. But the general release was in the old Technicolor. That special color, incidentally, was achieved in the laboratory, not in the camera, as in the case of the other two pictures.
Your films have combined entertainment with substance, unusual in today's Hollywood. How does a young director avoid being captured by Hollywood slickness?
The best answer to that is to not be a Hollywood slicker. Certainly you have to buck the purely commercial side of pictures today, more so probably than when I was starting out. I think there are exceptions that I make even as I utter these gems. But certainly as much, if not more, attention is paid to the commercial aspects of film today than occurred when the major studios were running the show. They could afford, I suppose, to be somewhat broader in their outlook. They had theaters to fill, but every picture didn't have to be a great box office success. Every movie today is conceived to be, or hoped to be by someone, however foolish, a box office triumph.
In the long shelf of pictures that you have made, if you had to choose 4 or 5 to keep right by your bedside, which would they be?
Otto Preminger was asked that question, and he said, they're all one's children, and one isn't to be loved any the less because it has a hare lip or a club foot. Well, that's partly true. I've got my favorites, but it wouldn't be fair to the others to reveal them. However, I also have the ones that I can bear, which brings me to another conjecture. Why we don't make over again on the pictures that we did badly instead of our successes. The Maltese Falcon has been done twice before I made it, and badly both times. But there was a good picture there, a great, wonderful picture there, the one that the book allowed me to make. That's true of so many other pictures that were failures in the making or in the writing.
In terms of director-actor relationship, how did it feel directing your father in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre?
Well, on the set, the director is the father image, so I was my own father's father. And as I appeared in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, I was my father also, so that made me my grandfather. It's like the play on Shakespeare in Joyce's Ulysses.
How did it feel to be directed by, say, Roman Polanski in Chinatown?
When it comes to working for another director, particularly when he is as good as Polanski, who is very good indeed, who I try to be just the most obedient of actors, so that I'll serve as an example to the actors who are in my pictures.
Do you give actors a little room to create on their own in different situations when you're filming?
I give very little room to the actors. I don't look to them to make creative contributions when it comes to the dialogue. Very often I've deplored the script even as I went up to production with it, but in general the screenplay should be as nearly perfect before shooting as one can get it. I think it's deceiving yourself to believe that you can wing it on the set. It has happened, I know, and there are certain directors that have done it with a degree of success, not me.
How about the Misfits? You had a company of actors there, Cliff, Gable, Monroe, who would need some room. The circumstances of their own lives must have had quite an effect on the film's story.
That is true, but it wasn't an immediate affair. It wasn't something of the moment. Arthur Miller wrote the script for Marilyn, and he had been out to Nevada and had met the equivalent of the roving cowboy part, played by Clark Gable. It was made out of materials at hand, sure, and then things that happened in the course of the picture were almost a counterpoint to the story of the picture itself. Marilyn was on her way out. But you know, in working with actors, most of my directing occurs before I ever reach the set, in selecting the actor that can be a strong statement itself. And when I go to cast a film, I don't think in terms of popularity of an actor that comes later, if at all. But I think who in the past in my own background is like this part. Not an actor, but just a figure who was like the person in the script. One goes to an actor for a facility, but sometimes the individual himself is his own character. His own nature is more important than the facility that his acting can endow. I remember when Brando played Anthony in Joseph Mankiewicz's Julius Caesar. To me, it's one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever witnessed, but it was something that had nothing to do with technique. It outraged the British at first blush, and then they decided it was the best performance of Shakespeare they'd ever seen. The picture itself was rather a weak echo of Shakespeare, but Brando hit some vain passion. Suddenly the furnace door opened and you were put into a sweat and then witnessed from the very heat of it. It's that natural outpouring that you don't have to be an actor to have.
Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse shall light upon the limbs of men. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. All pity choked with custom of fell deed, and Caesar's spirit, ranging for revenge with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, Hell! And let slip the dogs of war. That this foul deed shall smell above the earth, with carrion men groaning for burial.
When you chose 3 non-professionals to star in the Red Badge of Courage, did you try to encourage them just to be themselves when you were working with them?
Oh yes. I encourage a professional actor to be himself too, always. Always try to get the most out of an actor in the way of his own spiritual, for want of a better word, or instinctive contribution. But to get as much of the man himself and to direct as little as possible, to get as little of myself into his performance as I can, and as much of himself.
You said you had gone into some films deploring the script, but had to work with it anyway. I suppose that was because of contracts, money, and time.
That's right. There was only one outstanding exception, and that was Beat the Devil. I went into that film reluctantly because we had no script at all to speak of, or at least a very poor excuse for a script. Truman, Capote, and I rewrote it on the spot. But it wasn't done frivolously as has been described. We worked very hard and tried to keep ahead of the picture. In fact, I remember that on one occasion I didn't want the company to know how bereft we were, so I staged the scene that was already in the script and made it as complicated as possible in its moves. Then I went upstairs with Truman and rewrote it while the crew laid out tracks and took down walls. I came back down and said, "I've changed it, we got away with it, and we got away with the picture." But it was just the most fortunate of accidents that permitted it. To this day, I think it's an amusing good picture.
Ragazzi, 1, 2...
What kind of relationship do you have with editors of your films?
The editor and I hardly even need to know each other. Of course, I'm just making a point, but I'm a particular case here. I edit my pictures in the camera. I don't protect myself. I don't take other shots of the ones I need. One's almost forced to edit a film the way I shoot it. I don't believe that pictures are made in the cutting room. They're sometimes helped, but they are not made.
Your work incorporates some of the most difficult location pictures ever made, from the Treasure of the Sierra Madre to the African Queen. What do you look for in a producer when you go into difficult circumstances like those?
Help. To do the onerous things that permit you to give your entire attention to the quality of the picture rather than the problem, physical or otherwise, a producer must have the ability to bring forth the people that will help you the most, to understand the requirements of the picture. Some producers have a false sense of the requirements, or they want to have a critical role. I don't mean to demean or reduce a producer. It's a very important role. I'll probably be a producer myself when I'm no longer able to navigate.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.